Today's guest is Ricardo Fort. After 25 years working for some of the best companies in the world and almost a decade successfully leading the global sponsorship teams of Visa and the Coca Cola Company, Ricardo launched Sport by Fort Consulting to help sponsors, leagues, investors, and athletes successfully invest in sport. Having negotiated over $1 billion in sponsorship contracts, Ricardo is an expert with unique skills for helping investors evaluate, decide on, and negotiate partnerships. With senior executive posts, first at Visa and then at Coca Cola, Ricardo led the respective global portfolios of sports and entertainment sponsorships, partnerships, and events, including the International Olympic Committee, FIFA, and the UEFA on behalf of both those brands. And of course, each of those companies had many other sponsorship elements unique to it. But it's noteworthy that the leading global properties were a material part of both strategic platforms. Before Visa, Ricardo was the global marketing director for the dairy category at Groupe Danone, French company, for all U.S. listeners, Dannon Yogurt, and held several other posts at Coca-Cola in Brazil, USA and India, and multiple roles at Kellogg's and Unilever. He is married and the father of two college-age girls. Can't thank you enough, Ricardo, for joining us today. Welcome to the Best Boss Ever podcast series.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to talk to you.
Great. We always start each of these sessions with the single question prefaced by the fact that we all rise to a certain level of efficiency, proficiency, achievement in our business careers, but none of us gets there alone. We always work for or with individuals, mentors, coaches, bosses. So from your illustrious career, and I'll say that, an incredible body of work, who perhaps more than one, was the best boss that you ever had?
Well, that's a great way to start. And I've been lucky to have people around me, bosses, peers, my teams that were great, taught me a lot. Um, but I had a couple of different bosses that I learned a lot from, and they were very good in different things. And learning from them in what they were best at, I think made me a better person. So a couple of them that are worth mentioning. So Jeff Cotter, which was a former guest of yours. Jeff is the guy that brought me from Brazil. I was working at Coca-Cola in Brazil. He hired me to move to Atlanta to work for him back in 2002. And Jeff, I mean, what I always loved about Jeff is, he's super practical. He's very focused. He's a very honest guy, and he is a lot of fun to be around. So is all around a nice guy, knows what he does, and it has always been a pleasure to work with, and we've been friends ever since. Many years later, I left Coke. I came back to Coke, and I had the same, which is rare for a company like the Coca-Cola company, which is a very large company, to have the same boss for many years. I worked 5 years under B. Paris, which was
Yes.
my one of the best bosses that I had too. Uh, B, she's great in so many things, but and the ones that I would like to mention is she's very trusting, and once she realizes what you're capable of, and she just lets you do your thing, and she always pushed me to do more and to do what I knew how to do best. Always supported me, and one of the things that she did that helped me a lot in accomplishing what I had to do was help me understand and help me navigate the bureaucracy, decision making, all the processes of the senior management of the company. So she would give me advice on, so when you're presenting this is how this person thinks, and this is how you should do it. Position the recommendation, and it was very helpful, and I developed a lot under her, and it was great, a great time of my professional life. And then another boss that I had at Visa, Antonio Lucio. Antonio today is the CMO for HP. And Antonio is a big thinking guy. He's a classic marketer, and he always pushed me to think, bigger, different, and to do more. He was always pushing me and the entire team to take more risks and to do things differently. And when you join a company and you don't know how much room you have to for experimentation, having your boss telling you that you can and you should do more is also very empowering. So Jeff, B, Antonio, they helped me a lot. I mean, all of them are people that I still am happy to say they're friends, former bosses, but friends. And I know I counted on them before, and I can count on them today. So it's three of the best people that I worked with.
Well, those three great ones. I profess I do not know Antonio. I have met B before, and Jeff Cottrell and I go back a long time. And he's also a very good friend of mine. As you pointed out, he's a former guest on the show. But shortly before you joined Coca-Cola in 2002, Jeff and I were the respective leads on creating a very significant partnership with the Coca-Cola Company and the Coca-Cola brands at the Universal Studio theme park system across the globe. We consummated that deal in late 1999, early 2000, and it's still in place today, 25 years on. So that's a testament, I think, to obviously a great property in the Universal system on the one hand. On the other hand, the formidable power of the Coca-Cola brand and how the brand. I mean, you're sort of known by the company you keep, right? That's one of those great axioms, and it's true. So it has, I think, served both companies really well, and I'm glad to hear you call out Jeff Cottrell.
Mhm.
He's a great guy. So from there, what attributes would you say stuck with you, and then you then deployed those, and you already today still rely on the learnings and the guidance that you got from those three great bosses?
Mhm. So my work today, so I don't manage a team, but I work with clients and I help them be better at what they do when it comes to sports and sponsorships. And one of the things that I try to do, and I I think I'm good at, is to simplify complex environments and helping people to see what matters and not all the noise in a negotiation or in an activation or in whatever process they are involved with. In large organizations, it's very easy to get distracted by all the noise, and being focused. I think it's a superpower for people working in marketing. The other thing is, when some of the companies that I work with, when they sign a sponsorship, they usually are not fully aware of the possibilities of what they are buying, what the things they're buying can offer them to do. And it's a misconception that when you sign a contract, a lot of the things that you get are in the contract, when the reality is almost nothing that you're going to do is in the contract. If you are creative, and if you have good ideas to offer to your partner, to a league, to a team, 9 out of 10 times they will say, let's do it. And because the partners are not good at marketing, that's not their skill set, right? So if you are creative and if you think big, as Antonio taught me to do, you have greater chances to succeed in your partnerships and your sponsorship work. So these are some of the things that I learned, that I still apply for my clients.
Got it. Super, simplification in a complex environment is so key and important, and I applaud that for sure. But on the sort of sponsorship rights holder side, right? You say partner, and I assume you mean a rights holder, is really not core at marketing a brand sponsor's KPI. So let's take a very complex issue and distill it down to buyers and sellers, right? Buyers, typically the brands, sellers, typically the rights holders. So Fort by Sport, which is your consulting company, do you represent both sides of the desk, buyers and sellers, or are you more comfortable with the buy side since you were a very significant buyer for two massively large sponsoring companies in Coca-Cola and Visa?
Mhm. Yeah, so I most of my work is representing the buyers, and of course, this is an area that I'm very comfortable playing this role because that was most of my work life. So today, the companies that hire me are companies that are usually interested in investing as a sponsor to become a buyer. Sometimes they hire me because they don't have experience. Sometimes they hire me because they don't have experience in one specific area. Um, and it varies the types of work that I do. So I'll give you a couple of examples. When Salesforce wanted to enter Formula One, they hired me to help them understand what that world was, and they didn't have a structured sponsorship team, so I helped them. I select an agency and hire people and then work with them through contracts and giving them all the information they need to make a decision on what they are going to do. Other companies are very experienced in sponsorships. So AB InBev, for example, I mean they are one of the best, if not the best, company in sponsorships globally. But they have never worked with the Olympics, so they hire me to help them in the process of becoming a top sponsor of the IOC. So these are two very different sets of capabilities where they hired me for some time to help them solve a problem. And I realized that most of the companies they have problems for someone like me for a very short period of time. Most companies don't need me for in their payroll. So I come, I help them sort of solve a problem, and off they go. Very few companies need very senior people with experience in sponsorship. So if you are Coca-Cola company, if you are Heineken, if you are, of course, AB InBev, then you have a very structured team, very organized team. But most companies, they don't.
Right. So the skill set you have in sort of recognizing where there's no, heretofore experience, if you will, understanding the pitfalls and things to avoid, as well as things to grab onto when you're considering a sponsorship. All well and good. The more interesting part to me is where an experienced sponsor seeks you out for a specific item they either don't fully understand or they don't have experience in. And I think one of the areas that to me really supports the notion of a long-term successful partnership between buyer and seller is this term called brand activation. And I'm old enough, Ricardo, that I think this is right, that the credit of that marketing term, brand activation, around a sponsorship was coined back in the early 90s or late 80s, give or take a few years, by the Coca-Cola company. So in the world of brand activation, and obviously at the TOP IOC level or the principal sponsorship of a World Cup or a Super Bowl, how do you guide bringing to life that sponsorship from an activation perspective that helps buyer and seller enjoy the benefits that each brings to the table?
Mhm. Well, the from the seller's standpoint, most of them, when they sign the contract, they feel like their work is done. So they don't pay a lot of attention on how much the partner is investing, or of course the most sophisticated ones they care and they want the partners to promote the event, etc. But in general, a lot of people feel like their work is done after the contract is signed. So the responsibility of promoting and investing and working on that property on that partnership always sits with the buyer, so the company sponsor. And one of the things that a lot of companies and the companies that I work for, because they're so big and so resourced, I mean, is that you're very excited when you sign a contract and everybody, the entire organization wants to be part of it and they invest a lot. And over the years, it is not as exciting as it was on year one. So I tend to tell them that you have to look at this as a relationship between two people. You have a boyfriend, you have a girlfriend, and the first year is super exciting, and then the second year is exciting, and then eventually it's no longer that. So you have to constantly be reinventing their relationship to make sure that it's exciting, not only for your consumers, for your clients, but also for your organization. You have to use the rights that you have to solve problems that are changing every year on the business side. And I think this is one of the things that the best marketers working with sponsorships, they know how to do it. If you sign a 5-year contract with a Formula One team, the problems that you think you're going to solve with that sponsorship when you sign are very different from the problems that your business is going to face 5 years from now. And the good marketers, they pay attention in the problems, not in the partner, and they use the partner's rights to solve business problems every day. So you have to be constantly working on this relationship, and the activation is so important because of that. A lot of people, they talk about, there's a ratio of how much you spend in the contract and how much you spend on the activation. I mean, there is no ratio. It really depends on which contract you're talking about. But in general, in a very broader sense, you should invest more promoting what you bought than paying for the rights. So if you do it, chances are you are better off in helping your business to be successful.
Right. That's so well said, because what essentially is required is the buyer, in this case, always has to be looking forward and looking toward how and when and by what means, right, a business problem is addressed, for lack of a better term, vis-a-vis the relationship with the partner and the rights that have been conveyed to the buyer. So with that lens sort of looking forward, and your considerable history on the global sponsorship front lines, right? Where So let's talk about the health of global sponsorship, right? I mean, been in the business a long time. Rights fees continue to increase, and I'm not talking about media rights fees. I mean, that's a whole another kettle of fish, right? I'm talking about the sponsorship rights fees. I mean, as a practical matter, one would accurately surmise that when it's time for Visa and or Coca-Cola to renew their TOP sponsorship with the IOC, or their principal relationship with the FIFA and the World Cup tournament, those fees are not going to go down. They're going to go up. So what, in your view, Ricardo, is the outlook for global sponsorship? And what's the health of that segment, which has historically literally grown year after year with very few even flat lines, right?
It's hard to generalize the health and talk about the health of the sponsorship industry, because the sponsorship industry, it is very diverse. So there are organizations that are the very top of the world of sports or entertainment, whose rights fees continue to go up and will continue to go up because they are who they are. So if you think about the FIFA World Cup, the Olympic Games, the Champions League, the NFL, Super Bowl, these are all things that are very rare. And as very rare things, there's a lot of demand, and the price will continue to go up as long as there is demand for that. Then there are a lot of other things in the world of sports of organizations struggling to pay the bills. So you either are at the very top and you have this benefit of a lot of interest for what you offer, or you are somewhere else. And in somewhere else, it can be a sporting federation, can be an event, can be athletes, which are not getting any sponsorship money, and it's very hard for them to to count on brands to pay the bills. We think about soccer or football players, and that these mostly men but also women are flooded with offers from brands, and that's absolutely not the case. There's a handful of players that have many deals of endorsements, but the vast majority of players, they get maybe their boots free, um, and they have no sponsorship. So they rely exclusively on the salaries, and this is it's a very different reality by sport, by region. Basketball players make a lot of money, endorsements. NFL players make. Football players, soccer players, they is not necessarily the case. So it's hard to say that the industry is this way or that way. I would say that for the most visible part of the industry, it will continue to go up, and it will continue to go up because these are cultural moments where everybody's paying attention at, and attention has become more and more expensive because we are so distracted by everything else that is happening around us. So when you can finally get a lot of people to pay attention to the same thing, being the Super Bowl, being the FIFA World Cup, being the Olympics, that is very valuable. So um, it is a great time to be in the industry, because if you manage to connect brands and things that matter to their consumers, you can do a lot of great things for brands, for businesses, and along the way to the sporting organizations as well.
Right. Well, that's really important to know is that, I mean, we all know who the haves are, right? The haves are the IOC, the Olympic Games, the FIFA, the World Cup, the NFL, the Super Bowl, you know, a Formula One. I mean, talk about a supply demand curve. You got 10 teams, 20 cars on the grid. Period. Never going to be any more. And the only reason there's less is because they crash at somewhere on the circuit. All that said, you sort of mentioned that the haves will continue to have, right? I mean, it's pretty simple. On that note, I want to pivot a little bit from the global outlook to the U.S. outlook. And the U.S. outlook over the next 10 years kind of looks like this. There's a FIFA tournament in the U.S. in 2025. It's a club tournament, but it's a significant one, which is the run up to the World Cup coming back to the U.S. in 2026. Now, the last time the World Cup was in the U.S. in '94, what that did was it spawned Major League Soccer, the MLS league. And, under Don Garber's leadership over the last 20 plus years, the league continues to grow. You noted that. So that's in 26. In 28, the Olympic Games come to Los Angeles, right? For the first time since Salt Lake City in 2002. And in 2034, Salt Lake City again will be the host of the Winter Olympic Games. So over the next 10 years, 3 massive global events are coming to the U.S. I'm interested, apologies, to hear your view on these, very significant, iconic events coming to the U.S. and what that really means from a practical perspective, both in terms of buyers, the brands, and how they will leverage those opportunities in arguably the world's largest consumer marketplace.
Yeah, so it is, first of all, it's a privilege to be a marketer in the US for so many reasons. The sporting events is just one of them. So even if nothing of these global events that you mentioned, and there are a few more, the Rugby World Cup, men's and women's are happening in the States in 2030, 31. So there's a lot on an every day. If you take anything global that is happening in the US in the next decade, and you just look at the domestic events, is already a crowded market. It's a big market. It's a healthy market. When you throw on top of all of that, World Cup, Olympics, rugby, and cricket is growing too. So there's a lot of things going on. it just it creates in one side a lot of opportunities. So it's great that brands have all these tools to play with, and it also creates a lot of complexity. What's the right investment for for a given company? And you for the fans, it's fantastic. You have all of this happening in your backyard, so it's a really a privilege, as I said, to be in the States and to be able to experience all of this live. Most people will go through their lives without ever seeing a World Cup match or without ever seeing an Olympic Games, and we have the privilege of doing all of that in the next several years. So brands just need to be very clear what they need, what are their business challenges, because different events or different properties, they have more potential than others to help brands, help companies to solve their problems. And I think that this is very important, and this is where expertise helps help them solve these kinds of problems. So if you need to connect with communities, if you need to create awareness, if you need to, there are several different issues that sponsorships can help them solve. And if you are smart about how you invest your money, you get to the solution faster, cheaper, in a more interesting way if you are associated with one of these events. Having said all of that, just one comment on soccer specifically, because um, a lot of people abroad, they have this idea that Americans don't care about soccer, and they ignore the fact that the soccer media market in the States is one of the biggest in the world. You have everything available to you. There's a lot of consumption of, first Liga MX, the Mexican National League, which is the number one tournament in the US. There's a lot of consumption of the MLS. There's a lot of consumption of the Premier League and the other leagues, the La Liga, etc. So the American soccer fan is very sophisticated because it has everything available for them to watch every day, right? So which is great. So I don't think that the Club World Cup this year or the World Cup in 2026 are going to transform the country passion for soccer as it did back in when in the first one, because in the last 30 years the Americans developed the taste for soccer, and they
Right.
are consuming a lot of soccer today. So it's going to be great. It's going to be very interesting. It's going to be, a lot of people, a lot of demand for tickets, for hospitality, etc., because they already like soccer, and it's going to be different than it was before.
Well, that's very intuitive and I think accurate. You did mention one thing that I failed to mention, which was rugby and rugby coming to the U.S. Um, at its core, rugby is a version, right? Um, Different rules. It's really a fun game to watch, and I mean, most U.S. Fans that don't have some affiliation with a national team overseas or whatever, if they're familiar with rugby, most likely it's the rugby sevens.
Mhm.
And with the rugby sevens on the Olympic platform now, that's very significant. So in 2028, you're going to see, right, uh, Olympic rugby on the back of the LA Games. But okay, I'm continue to ask you to put on to look through the crystal ball of your experience. Does rugby have a similar opportunity to capture the imagination of the U.S. fan, U.S. investors, and growth in a rugby league when the World Cup comes here in 30 or 31, as was the case 30 years ago when the World Cup of soccer came to the U.S.?
Yeah, so uh, I think it's unlikely. And the reason why it's unlikely is um, just looking globally, rugby is uh, a smaller sport compared to soccer or to football. So the US is so big, and there's so many sporting fans and sporting fans' behaviors. There's so much variety that rugby will find its place in the US, right? It's not going to be the size of soccer because there are a lot more people interested in soccer than there is people interested in rugby. I mean, just the Hispanic population in the US, and I'm not saying that only Hispanic population is interested in soccer, but it's a disproportionate amount of people that
Right.
are attracted to soccer because of heritage. I mean, I'm Brazilian. I always follow soccer first, right? Rugby is a great sport, but it's a sport that it attracts, you know, different types of audiences. So it will be, I think, rugby will have its space in the U.S. It will be recognized. There will be a league. It will be a big sport compared to leagues in other countries, but it's going to be a smaller sport compared to, of course, the American sports. I don't even talk about that, but no, soccer,
Right. I
which
think that's a
is a
fair
mistake
assessment.
not to call it soccer an American sport because it's
Well, no,
one of the
right.
largest
You're
leagues, but
right. We know all this. I mean, it's so fun to watch that. So I guess net, you say there is a future for rugby. It'll be niche, not sort of, at the MLS level. Nonetheless, there is a future. I believe, and I agree with you that there is a future for rugby here in the U.S. And I'm keen to watch it unfold.
yeah,
So thanks
and
for
I
that.
think we should in the same line. Um, you should we should look with more attention to cricket. Cricket is likely to grow faster than rugby in the next 10 years because there is a lot of investment in cricket today. There's a lot of interest from the cricket board to come to the US and to develop in the US. It's a big market for any league. So cricket is likely to go. If I had to bet, I would say cricket is going to grow faster than rugby in the next 10 years in the US.
Oh man, I'd love to see the odds makers put that on the board. Cricket or rugby? All right, and let's handicap those and make a bet and see. That's super interesting. I mean, I've watched live both cricket and rugby and test cricket over how many ever days. In the same way that rugby 15s got distilled down to really fast, rugby 7 games, I think all these formats get revised, right, to audience tastes. I can remember when I was running all the commercial and media enterprise for beach volleyball on men's and women's. And this was the run up to the debut of beach volleyball in Atlanta in 1996. It had not been an Olympic sport until then. So we had a partner, NBC Sports, who was the Olympic broadcaster, knew beach volleyball was coming on the program in 96. So 93, 94, 95, NBC Sports did a really good job of featuring and promoting not only beach volleyball, but in 1995, there were 22 and a half hours of live beach volleyball coverage on the network. Now, you're Brazilian, and the Brazilians do very well in beach volleyball. They do very well in indoor six women volleyball. The interesting thing that happened is when NBC first started broadcasting beach volleyball, they used side out scoring. And side out scoring requires two things. One, you can't score a point when you're not serving. You have to win that point. No points get scored. That's side out. You now can only score when you serve the ball. And you have to win by 2. So what was happening is in a live event coverage of a beach volleyball match, side out, side out, side out, side out. All of a sudden we come to the top of the hour and the match is not decided and NBC cuts away and the players went crazy. So I got together with a former guest on the show, David Michaels, who was one of the leading producers for NBC for a long time. He was an Olympic producer. It was, figure skating on the winter side. It was men's and women's gymnastics in the summer games, and he was extraordinary at his craft. So I sat with David and I said, "We got a problem here." He goes, "Yeah, we have a big problem." And I said, "What if we just go to rally scoring, which is every side scores a point when they win, whether they were server or not. And the game's to 21, and you don't have to win by two. And we put that in front of the players, and the debate was pretty intense. So finally, David's sitting there, and I'm trying to navigate this morass, and I said, "Okay, guys, you have two choices. You either adopt rally scoring, or David, what's going to happen?" And he says, "Well, here's what's going to happen. Never going to see the end of a match on a live NBC broadcast." And he says, "Oh, and by the way, it's really important to NBC to feature this because your players are going to represent the US and Brazil and Italy and whomever in Atlanta at the debut of beach volleyball on the Olympic stage. So figure it out." And then I didn't even say nice job, David. I just said, "Okay, show of hands for rally scoring." And so the rest is history. We got that done. But those kinds of nuances, right? It's the formatting of cricket. It's the formatting of rugby so that it appeals to the audiences that are going to consume it, right?
Yeah, it matters. Well, LA will feature a cricket, which is going to be, a first. It'll be very interesting to see how the American audience and the fans that are coming to the States for the games are going to react to that.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think that's right. So that's very cool. I'll say I'm going to ask you to put the crystal ball glasses on again here. So in the Olympic movement, there's a new IOC president who will be elected this coming March. And as we record this, it's like 4 or 5 weeks from now. It's very soon. So when the newly minted president of the IOC comes in, not necessarily her or his challenges, but from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest obstacles, the biggest challenges on the horizon in the Olympic movement as the U.S. prepares to host 2 Olympic Games over the next 10 years? And I'm wondering out loud here, Ricardo, and I'd love your perspective. So doping historically has been a huge problem. We talked off camera about the 1976 steroid debacle with then the East German women, subsequently the Chinese women, and the steroid problems. There's a group at the IOC level, the World Anti-Doping Association. I wonder how effective they really are and if there's a future for them. We've experienced it, certainly in the last 4 to 6 years, a rising tide of sexism in binary gender and transgender athletes. Is how strong a headwind is that, especially when you look at what's occurred here in the U.S. over the last month, and then the global politics, where and how does that all come into play? And fundamentally, we've known this forever, the dramatically rising costs that it takes to actually organize and host the games or anything else you see on the horizon. And I'm specifically talking about the challenges and headwinds that, from your perspective, the new Olympic administration is going to face.
Yeah, so there are many things on the plate of the new president. So I guess there's a bucket of work around integrity, and integrity, is a very big bucket because it has a lot of things in it. So doping is a big one. WADA, which is the Global Association for the Anti-Doping Organization, they are an independent body, which I think is the right thing to do. It's independent from the IOC, but the IOC works with them. So WADA needs to improve what they deliver to sport. In the last year or so, there has been a lot of discussions between the WADA body in the U.S. and global. I mean, they have to find a way to be more credible and to be definitive in what they do for sport. I don't think they operate at the same level as the IOC, for example. And so there's some work at the WADA level that needs to be done. I think that this whole that the issues on gender and trans athletes has been blown out of proportion, because the number of, if you are going to look back in the last years, and the number of situations where there was a potential issue for sport, it is very, very small. So I guess there are multiple ways of looking at it, and the IOC needs to play a role in that. So first, every sport is different, and the rules cannot be general rules for all sports, right? So um, the potential advantages or disadvantages that one gender will have versus another if they're competing together, they are very different if you are, running, jumping, or if you are shooting, or if you are. So I guess every federation needs to be, more disciplined and more clear about what the rules are for each of the sports. That's, I guess, and the IOC has to play a role with that. And all of that is about making the sport fair for every athlete and more
Right.
inclusive for every athlete. So that, I think that's integrity. There's a few things there. Then you also have the idea of making sports more accessible, because of course the role of the IOC is not only to organize the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games is the biggest, most visible thing they do, but they also have a role of promoting Olympism and this sport as a whole globally, and they do it by sharing 90% of their revenues with the federations, etc. But as I said before, the sporting federations, the sporting organizations around the world, most of them are not financially sustainable, and that's not a way to, into the future. We have to find a way that either with partnership with governments or continued support of the IOC, continued support from brands, the sporting organizations around the world, they can perform at the right level and being useful for society. I think that's another. So the financial sustainability of sport is a big issue. Then there's a third, and I stop here. There's a third bucket, which is just on the Olympic Games themselves, because the Olympic Games are being reinvented as we speak. Every Olympic game is different. We started in places that were hosting all the games in one city, and then now you have different countries or different cities, different states. So LA is going to be the LA Games, but you have competition in many different places. Paris had competitions in many different cities in other regions of the world as well, in the example of surfing. So the IOC is working with the organizing committees, each of the hosts, to find more effective ways of executing the Olympic Games in a way that is sustainable for the cities. Having said that, it is very different the way and I say we Americans, I'm American too, so we Americans look at the organization of an Olympic Games, and Saudi Arabia or Russia or another country in other parts of the world would look at the organization. So when Russia spent $50 billion organizing the Winter Games of Sochi, they said, a lot of people criticized them for that, and they said, well, it's my money. I want to do it. I want to put up the show. I want to develop sport. So I need to build infrastructure. For them, maybe 50 billion was the right number. 50 billion would never be the right number for a private organized Olympic Games like the United States. So
Right.
if the city of LA gives $50 billion it would be a crime. So that's the
Correct.
wrong thing to do. So you have to look with perspective of what's right for that specific event. And some events are, they must be more sustainable and cheaper, to be simple, than others. The IOC has that in mind, and the selection of future hosts take that into account, which is great. So we spend more in developing things for
Right.
everyone to be part of the games, and less in building infrastructure.
Right.
So I
And
think these
it's
are a few things that the new president will certainly pay a lot of attention to.
no, that's super insightful. And I think, as a practical matter,
Mm.
the IOC and the Olympic Games as a global enterprise, really, to your point, it gets executed locally, whether it's the host city, the host country, an international federation, or an NGB on a country by country basis, right? So and to the extent that the considerable wealth generated via the Olympic Games and the rights associated with same find their way down to these local organizations, it's better for everybody, and that's the remit to continue to grow and expand sport across the world. So thank you for that, Ricardo. Super insightful. Listen, we've got a few minutes left. We're now going to go into what I call the three hot questions, which I ask everybody. So first one is, what was your favorite mistake? That's the one where you obviously messed up, but you learned the most from it. You had a willingness or a partner, if you will, in your organization that helped navigate through what that mistake might have been, and it's still with you today as something not to do.
I'll give you a career mistake, not a work mistake. Well, it's a work mistake anyway. But I took a job. I took a job at Danone in their headquarters in France. I was working for Coca-Cola. I have worked for Coca-Cola. I had for 12 years. I was the head of marketing for India and a few other countries. I was living in India, and I wanted to do something different. So I quit my job for this new job at Danone. Danone is a wonderful company, is based in Paris. So I moved to Paris. I was one of their three global marketing directors. And it's a great company for a lot of things, but not for the things that I am good at or I like to do. And in my interviews with, different people and the CMO, at the end of the process, I left with a feeling that the job had certain characteristics that were opposite to the reality. So I moved to France, and I realized in the first month that it was a misfit. And I made an effort, they made an effort, but it was clear that wasn't going to work. So 6 months into the job, when my wife and my daughters moved from India, because I left them there to finish the school year, when they moved from India to France, everybody was super excited to live in France. Wonderful to be in Paris. And I told them the day they landed, this is not going to last. Enjoy, enjoy for as long as it lasts. So, and 6 months later, I quit. And that says nothing about Danone.
Right.
I guess that says nothing about me. But sometimes I think you just have to do your homework. And I didn't do my homework to the extent that I was supposed to. I should have talked to more people to understand the culture, to understand the job, to make a decision, which was a very important decision. And I don't regret that. It was a mistake, and I corrected the course of my career quickly, and so I stayed exactly 1 year in that job, and then I move on to do other things that I liked, that I'm good at, and it was a good learning for me.
Well, it's not only a good learning for you, it's a good learning for everybody, in particular the audience that's listening. Because when one goes through an interview process, more often than not, they take a posture of, I'm the one being interviewed, so I've got to answer all the questions. I've got to suggest that, I might be smarter than the average bear, however you want to frame that. What oftentimes gets missed, which you just called out, is as you are one, is interviewing the company as much and as to a great extent as that company is interviewing you for exactly the reasons you just described.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yep. Good. Thank you for that. Okay, this is a fun one. So the favorite live concert you ever attended where a female artist or a female-led band was the headliner?
Okay. I'll give you. So my top of mind, my favorite one was watching Diana Krall singing in Rio de Janeiro. She recorded a special in Rio. You can find it, I think, on YouTube. And I love her music and the setting and the place. And she sang most of the music that I was familiar with, so it was a lovely experience. I give you another one just because I can. I saw Lady Gaga performing in Atlanta, which was fantastic as well. So both very different types of music, but great performers.
Right. Wow, those are two great calls. I have had the pleasure of being at a live, very intimate event where Diana Krall, you know, just mesmerized the audience for 90 minutes. It was really an incredible show. And I mean, we're talking 100 people in the room. I mean, it was unbelievable.
What a privilege.
Um, Lady Gaga's on my bucket list. I have not had a chance to see her, but I definitely want to. So those are two really good ones. The last one is the sort of pithy one, if you will. Words matter. We all know it, right? It's what you say, it's what you don't say, particularly in a leadership position. So, your favorite word and why?
I will go with welcome, and for multiple reasons. So I guess we are living in times where we're so divided, and the idea of making the other, whoever the other is, to feel welcome and respected and included. I mean, this can make a lot of difference in this person's life. So, uh, and the feeling of being welcome is something, as a foreigner. I moved from Brazil to the States. I moved from the States, to India. Now I live in Portugal, and it makes a world of difference when you feel like you are welcome, despite all the differences that you may have from everybody else. So this is my favorite word.
I love that. I love that. It's a very human requirement to feel welcome and to, as importantly, welcome those others into your life that, for whatever reason might not be the same, or you get this, you've got two daughters, they bring home friends you've never met before, and you welcome them because that's what you do.
Yeah.
um, that is great wisdom there, Ricardo. Listen, I can't thank you enough. Our session is over, but you've been a tremendous guest with really intelligent, thoughtful insights across a wide variety of topics. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Best Boss Ever podcast.
No, thank you again for having me.